So today we'll be speaking about kind of a recent project we've been doing with the London Borough of Lambeth in designing with data. To begin with, we'll just introduce ourselves.
Hello, I'm Alex Tilouche. I'm now head of data and analytics at Lambeth, but I was previously data architect there, which is why that's what that said before.
And I'm Alan Cranberry, technical director from Capita Consulting Data Services.
I'm Beth. I'm a service and interaction designer at Fjord, which is a design and innovation consultancy in London and part of the Accenture family. So for this project, in context to why we're all standing on stage together, we worked with Lambeth on a project for their housing repairs service. Capita was already partnering with Lambeth, and so Accenture and Fjord went and joined them. Day to day, though, we just worked as one team. So we worked very closely with Alex and his team, as well as our kind of main clients that we were designing for, the housing management team. I'm going to pass back to Alex to talk about the data analytics and insight team.
Thanks. So data analytics and insight is a new function at Lambeth, and we are there to offer subject matter experts with some particular skills that we can use to help our partners across the organisation collaborate. It's a service of three teams: integration, spatial analysis, and data science. But the main point for me to bring that up here is that we're new, and it's a new way of working for us in the organisation. So we needed to partner with some experts to help us scale and deliver some of these early products and those elusive quick wins. So that's where Beth and the team from Fjord, Accenture, and our friends at Capita came in to help us.
Wonderful. So this project was trying to understand how could we use the rich data that Lambeth already had in their housing repairs different platforms as a way to drive a better customer experience. And I'll expand a little bit on this second line, the single analytical view of the housing stock, and actually what that meant. This project initially started off as a 5-week investigation into this brief. So what does housing repair system look like, and what are the opportunities for improving the resident experience? Lambeth is a pretty big borough. It's also got a very large stock, so apparently 35,000 properties. So when you have a large number of responsive repairs going on, as well as kind of annual maintenance activities, remedial actions off the back of that, and capital investment, so kind of replacing all the kitchens in a given block, that can get very complex and also very emotional, both for the residents whose lives are being impacted by living in a kind of a property that's not fully working, and also for kind of the council and the members there. They're trying to improve the resident experience and are often kind of blocked by processes, by systems, by budget constraints. So to tackle this piece of work, we had researchers, service designers, business designers, strategy, as well as people from Implied Intelligence in the kind of wider Accenture team. And the way that we worked together was bringing service design, so that's kind of your people-orientated, so understanding kind of human needs, and then some of the strategic rigor. So once we understand kind of the people and the problems that we're facing, what is the size of that problem? How is it impacting the business? If you talk about kind of call volumes, well, what does an increase in call volumes look like, both for call centre staff, the cost of running that service, and the impact to residents' lives? At the end of 5 weeks, we had a kind of map of the system and opportunities identified, and we looked at two different repair journeys: the internal repair journey for customers, so residents, and then a communal repair journey as well. And in that, we identified different pain points and sized them up, and there were 8 different design briefs. So the design brief we'll speak to about was the single analytical view of the housing stock to support with strategic decisions and increase coordination. Now, when you see a brief like this, first question for me is single analytical view for who? So who are the users that we're designing for in this situation? What are their needs? Then secondly, strategic decisions. Well, what are those decisions? What's the information or what's the data that they need to see in order to effectively make that decision? And then thirdly, increase coordination. Well, who's coordinating? In what context are they maybe making this decision and then coordinating? So to tackle this brief, our approach was looking at kind of data design needs to be, apologies for the formatting, it's a bit rogue. User orientators, that tiny text there talks about, we use design methodologies, design tools, mindsets, to understand kind of fundamentally what are our users in this situation, the Lambeth housing repairs team, so repairs managers, asset management team, among others. And then kind of data shaping, which is about kind of aggregating the data they had from the respective systems and trying to understand, given the users we spoke to and their needs and the types of decisions they're trying to make, how can we present the data that they have in the most informative and accessible way to enable them to make those decisions. And lastly, how can we be contextually aware? So where are they using this tool? Where are they making these decisions? And what happens both before and after they've made that decision? So expanding a bit on kind of contextually aware, what do we mean here? It's about being holistic, so kind of being end-to-end in terms of when you start to think about designing with data. So you may hear kind of, well, once you've got that data, we'll pull it together and then we'll show it to them and then they'll be able to make a decision. But you need to understand kind of, well, where is that data coming from? What's the decision that person's needing to make? And then after they've seen that tool in that exact moment, what are they going to do next, and then next, and then next? So the tool you're designing is only one touch point in a wider end-to-end experience. And system-wide then talks on that as well, so kind of what are the different systems at play. And contextually aware, so here kind of the context for Lambeth is that from early on, thankfully, they were saying we want to be an evidence-based organization. They were ready to start using their data to justify and kind of strategically back up some decisions they were making. So it's kind of being aware of that context. We can't go and make a really complex data visualization tool when the organization itself, although ready to become evidence-based, is actually relatively new to the tool we were using, which is Power BI, and relatively new to making evidence-based decisions. So that's another factor that we need to take into account. In the context of this problem, we were looking at kind of this was the system. So our kind of key users were from the repairs team. We touched on maintenance a bit. We spoke to some of the call center staff. And then we also spoke to the asset management team, the major works team, so they're kind of doing those big, we're going to replace all the kitchens projects. And then finance, and they're both finance from the repairs budget and repairs spend, but also the major works teams. Now that single view, so the original brief that I was speaking about, the issue was that these guys on the right focused off one system. They had no visibility of the repairs activity which was going on in another system. So the opportunity for us was about bridging that gap. And how could we use latest repairs service data to drive more strategic decisions when it came to longer-term capital investment? In terms of how we started to pull this together, and I'll kind of show you some screens later in terms of what we actually built for them. So in 7 weeks, we went from that statement to a working prototype in Power BI using Lambeth data. But we also then gave them a kind of visualization of what the journey is and what the narrative is and how they could start to build out those screens in future. So how might 3 different teams who presently look at individual systems actually come together and look at one system to make strategic decisions together? So how did we actually go about doing it, and what are the key principles that we keep in mind when we're doing this type of work? Number 1, always start with a problem. So if you take the time to understand the problem and the people involved in that system and the actual root cause of what they're trying to do, you can try to design something that actually solves that problem as opposed to kind of presenting information that's just all the information they've got. At Lambeth, this was about kind of those teams and hitting on that gap. And that helping to kind of map out the system helped us to understand, well, there's 2 systems here. Do those 2 systems actually speak to each other? Where is the data join? That means we can start to layer that information on top of each other. What about the quality of data in those systems? And fundamentally, kind of given who needs to see it, repairs managers, asset management team, major works, what's the form that they need to see it in if they've never seen visualization like this before? So designing for that and understanding to begin with. And number 2, find your intervention. So given the previous problem, namely a lack of visibility, a lack of communication, what's the action that they want to take to overcome this? So giving them a single view is going to help. But fundamentally, going back to the slide I showed before, the major works team need to see kind of patterns in latest repair data. They need to be able to understand kind of as it's happening in the moment, where am I seeing a spike in mold and damp cases that may be indicative of a bigger issue, say with a leaky roof, that actually I need to go and invest a large amount of money on in the next kind of 2 years so I can reduce the number of repairs, responsive repairs that I'll see over the coming years, whilst also increasing the housing stock in the long term. So once we kind of understood that, it's then, once you give them that visualization tool and it starts to drive different decisions, how does this start to impact business processes once that tool's in there, and then how do you scale that across? And throughout this, we were working very closely with them to say kind of, well, this is what we assume. This is what we assume. Then we start speaking to people and get a bit more detail. And then we work with them to iterate it and say, okay, well, you've got this tool. Actually, what can we deliver? Who's going to be using it? Have you got the skill sets in your business? Does someone even have time to take this on as an additional kind of analysis element? So working through those details with them, and then simplifying it down and trying to say, okay, well, day one, this is where we're going to go to, and we can work with you and give you a kind of clear guidance on what day 2 and day 3 will look like. And then lastly, design together. I will happily admit that before this project, I was relatively basic in my knowledge of housing repairs services. And therefore, it's really important to work with Lambeth, who are the experts. They may not know how to kind of design projects with data, but they do understand their housing service. So by working with them, we could take a very high-level sketch that was pulling in everything from playgrounds, parks, different repair services, what's the state of the road, and trying to kind of pull that into a view. That's what they wanted, and we understood kind of their needs from it. We were then able to kind of pull the data back and say, okay, initially, really quick and dirty, we can say, if you got this, is this helping you to make some of the decisions that you can't make now, to take actions against the problems you're tackling now? And then over time, we iterated it with them and started to pull it into kind of something a bit tidier. So this one on the screen was for the repairs team, because they didn't have visibility of kind of day-to-day, what were the repairs being raised in their borough. And elements like what's the WIP change. So easily they can say, okay, well, where it's gone red, that's where I need to be paying attention, that's where I need to send surveyors. So it's helping them with a relatively new tool, how can we give them kind of quick visual cues? And over time, this can become a more complex and a more rich data screen. But for now, given that they're a relatively new organization to this sort of work, it's keeping it simple. We also, beyond the housing repairs team, did regular show and tells. So we were kind of being very open and honest. This is the work we've got, taking online feedback. And this is really helpful, particularly when you're trying to shift the whole council towards being a bit more evidence-based, because you're being very open and honest. Look what housing repairs are doing. Actually, within social services, you could start to do this as well. And we had people coming up to us and saying, well, could you do this maybe? Could you do that? And it's starting that conversation. That conversation should obviously then naturally go back to, okay, well, what problems are you trying to face? And then build back into it. But it's a great way to start to change the culture as well. And then other views we were looking at were kind of, well, how could we give them visibility of the changes in housing stock, patterns in repair or disrepair as they occurred, so they could be more proactive with their surveying. An unintended consequence of this was they also had visibility of the quality of their data, so that started additional conversations as well. So I'm going to pass to Alan to talk about.
So I thought it's probably worth reflecting at the end on, you know, what was good about this approach? Why does it work? And for someone like me who comes from very much a data background, that's been my career essentially. You know, we used to very much think in terms of the data. We used to think about, you know, we've got data sitting there in a source system on the top left there. We used to think about bringing that into a data repository. And then once we've got that kind of data structure all mapped out, then, oh yeah, let's put some visualization on the front and, you know, let's use our business intelligence tools and let's distribute that to users who then use it. And yes, there might have been like requirements gathering, there might have been a journey, but typically these processes take a long time. The end-to-end, the turnaround is but almost by the time the user gets something, they've forgotten what they asked for in the first place. And they probably didn't know what to ask for because they didn't see it, they didn't know what it was going to look like. One of the things I've always said to people is users don't know what they want until they see what they don't want. And that's exactly what happens. This approach turns that on the head. And it says, right, let's consider the users from day one. Let's engage with them. Let's understand the real pain points they have, the real processes that they have to deal with. But let's go beyond that. Let's also think about how that's benefiting the residents. So it's not just people within the council, it's actually how we use that to improve the residents' experience out there in the world. And then we do that by using that visualization and how the users interact with that. And then we kind of worry about the data later. Because we then know what we're looking for, the users have engaged with it, they've seen it, we then know what to do in the back end to make, to worry about our data management and to worry about how we interface with the source systems. And yes, there will be challenges with that. And yes, we might end up with a position where we've tried to show something to the user and we can't actually deliver it later because there's various kind of underlying problems. But that gives us then the impetus to know what it is that we have to solve. So I tried to capture some of the kind of strengths. It's rapid. So what do we do here? This was, initial 5 weeks, but then 7 weeks initially to really get that prototype out there, get the users engaged with it, get them to use it. And it brings the concept to life for them. And from budgetary considerations, it doesn't cost too much. What we're not doing is embarking on a 2-year program here. We're saying 7 weeks of activity, there we are, we've delivered you something. It's focused on the users. So when they see it, they relate to it, they own it, and then they want more of it. Exactly as Beth said, it drives that demand for, we want more, we want it in other services. So it's taking us on that journey. The engagement piece, that Beth talked about has been critical in getting the buy-in from the people who are going to use these things at the end of the day. And that encourages them to use it and to embed it in their processes, in their BAU kind of activity, and drive that kind of cultural change. A lot of people these days talk about failing quickly, and absolutely this does it that way. So if something didn't work, the team could quite quickly say, actually, that doesn't resonate, don't go there. But we haven't spent a whole load of time building a data model behind it in order to get there and find that out. We knew that very quickly from the start. And then the ongoing the iterative approach means we can then take that and we can refine it, we can add to it, we can embed it further into cultural processes. And then we can think about the whole productionization aspect. So that, the initial prototype, the 7 weeks, was it productionized? No, it wasn't. But that's something we can do because we've now got a real reason to do it. We've delivered some benefits, and we've now got the organizational impetus to get that delivered. The one cautionary bit that I think in this approach that we need to think about is how it aligns with the rest of our strategy. So I think it would be possible to do a whole load of these and you could end up with a complete mess. And in the background, I think you need to have some thoughts about how your strategy fits together. And Alex and his team have that in the back of their minds. They're working on that in parallel. So that kind of, in this context, that works really, really well. We're very much at the right hand, the sort of right hand, what would be like 4 or 5 o'clock on that on that little chart. So we're talking about analytics. We're enabling, how we can enable a predictive capability around the housing repairs. We're starting to see them be able to look at what's happening and use that to predict the future. Okay, it's not ultimately, it's not using clever algorithms in the background, but it could, and it probably will in the future. And it's moving us up towards that data-informed decision-making, allowing them to use that data to, in their BAU processes. But all those other pieces need to go on in the background, and are and will. I don't intend to talk about them all in great detail, but you can sort of read them. The data quality is something that we did come across in the project. The Northgate and the Keystone systems, they don't match particularly well. There are issues. But again, by exposing that quickly, we've then learned what those challenges are, and we can work with the rest of the council to try and address them. So that thing is something that I think you do need to have as part of this kind of thinking, and we do in this case. Cool. So just to wrap up, really, and gives us hopefully plenty of time for some questions and discussion. I'd just like to, it's very much these guys who've done it and made it happen. It was great that we could bring that together as Capita and be part of the journey. But it's lovely to be able to come and see people talk about a bit of a success around the data world. So thank you very much.
Yes, is the short answer. The slightly longer answer is the method of delivery for this is what's surfaced some of that in those interesting questions for us. As Beth and Alan pointed out, the fact that we've got something in front of people quickly that they could use and start interacting with their data and asking themselves questions about it is what sparks all of those other things. So this method of working and engaging with the service teams is enabling exactly that kind of conversation in Lambeth now.
And then building on that, from a design perspective, we were initially looking at that kind of paper sketch in the top corner that was bringing in all those different data sets. Crime was one of them, and domestic abuse is sadly a subsection of that. But it was looking at kind of, well, once we have a vision of kind of what's going on in the place, how do we then start to layer in other data sets, and how is that presented back to people in a way that they can make decisions off it? But very much kind of you need to give them something to look at for them to understand, and actually if they proactively come up to you and say, well, could we put this sort of data on top of it, then they're ready for you to kind of take those steps. So I can't remember the exact numbers, although there are a couple of members of my team here who might be able to answer the exact number question later. But one of the, so halfway through the presentation, in that first 5 weeks, one of the 8 design briefs we looked at was actually a resident-facing kind of portal for helping to raise queries and then track them through. And one of the kind of key use cases and value metrics around that was around reducing the number of calls that came into the call centre. They tested initial designs of that, which were just an interactive prototype, and it resonated extremely well with customers. And there are different, so things like non-emergency repairs. People were very happy to raise in a portal, and actually just getting the information back. Even if you said, we're not going to come out for 2 weeks, they're like, great, you've told me you're not coming for 2 weeks, and I can plan around that. Also, at the moment, a large number of the calls coming into the call centre, a high percentage, are people calling to try and track the status of their repair. So if you give them that visibility online, you're reducing a huge number of the calls coming in. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but we did test that with customers, and we were residents, and we were kind of understanding from them there were certain things, such as tracking the kind of status of their repair, and reporting certain repairs, but not all of them, that they were happy to do online. And in some instances, they prefer to do online instead of going to a call centre, waiting in a queue, and then having to call back the whole time. So in this instance, we were kind of quite fortunate that a lot of our users were actually the members of the council teams, and we kept it closed. So this, the design that we went for originally is internal facing. It's about supporting the council staff involved in that repair service to run a more efficient and more kind of strategic service. So how would we, I can talk from kind of other projects, if kind of you're a resident or want certain things, when you come back from testing and you say, well, actually, if you can come with me to the testing, listen and hear with your own eyes and see that people don't need that information, actually they need this. And from personal experience, it doesn't resonate half as well when I'm saying it. The best way to persuade your client or the council that actually kind of what the resident needs is X is to get them to come along to the customer testing sessions.
Just on that, I mean, that resonated from my team, new as they were, in how Beth and the rest of the team engaged with our users in the rest of the business. That's something we hadn't employed before, and that kind of direct engagement for and embedded almost in that service delivery team is something that we're taking as a hugely valuable lesson from this. So getting right in there amongst the users and finding out what their needs are and giving them something to work with straight away. We'll be using it across the